Best of the very best. It may only be half as powerful, 10th as reliable. None of that matters.
Chris Evans cracks me up. He's going to be going on and on about cars are better in the old days. I'm here to tell you they weren't. They suck.
The brand new series of Top Gear, available now on BBC iPlayer.
The people have spoken. Britain has voted to leave the EU. So what on earth will happen next? To our economy, to our relations with Europe, to our politics here at home.
Nick Robinson hosts The Big Decision. Available now on BBC iPlayer.
Time for an extended Newsnight now here on BBC Two with Evan Davis.
21. New messages.
I had no longer had confidence in his leadership.
It will not be plain sailing.
That is an untenable situation.
Britain's global role remains undiminished.
We can hold on like grim death, but I think it will be the death of the Labour Party.
We should hold fast to a vision of Britain.
I think we need to go and have the leadership election that has now become inevitable.
No informal talks about the exit of Great Britain.
Our country is divided.
It's clear now that Project Fear is over.
And the country will thank neither the benches in front of me nor those behind.
And I thought I was having a bad day.
For indulging in internal factioning manoeuvring at this time.
Save Jeremy!
Go baby, go, go. We're right behind you. Go baby, go, go. Oh, we're right behind you.
Huge thank you to Jeremy, not just for coming here and speaking.
Hello, so much going on. England said it wanted to exit Europe, but not surely 2-1 down to Iceland, accompanied by the resignation of yet another national leader in the form of Roy Hodgson. Prepare for an onslaught of Brexit gags and Iceland model. I suggest it may be wise not to read the continental newspapers for a few days. But the football was not the only drama today. It was also quite a scene in the Commons. The Prime Minister, his tormentors, all in the same chamber. Jeremy Corbyn was there in the middle of a coup. The Chancellor had come out of hiding too, with the markets still troubled. And Mr Cameron switched out of the campaign mode we've become familiar with, back to being Prime Minister.
It was not the result I wanted, nor the outcome that I believe is best for the country I love. But there can be no doubt about the result. Of course, I don't take back what I said about the risks. It is going to be difficult. We've already seen that there are going to be adjustments within our economy, complex constitutional issues, and challenging new negotiation to undertake with Europe. But I am clear, and the Cabinet agreed this morning, that the decision must be accepted and the process of implementing the decision in the best possible way must now begin.
Now, there was one tiny point, or maybe not, in answer to one question from the SNP leader in the Commons. The Prime Minister appeared to say something quite important. Just have a listen.
But let me say this to him. Scotland benefits from being in two single markets, the United Kingdom and the European single market. In my view, the best outcome is to try and keep Scotland in both.
Was he telling us that Britain should be in the European single market? That is the Iceland model. That's not what Vote Leave had been saying. But we will discuss all of that and more. Let's focus now on the Labour Party first. Last year, it defied the experts, it challenged the established order and selected Jeremy Corbyn as leader. Has that experiment in new politics worked? Not according to the Parliamentary Labour Party, which is in full-scale revolt, nor the shadow cabinet, which has had a resign-around-the-clock approach. The leadership has been fighting back, though. Our political editor Nick Watt reports.
Corbyn in, Tories out, Corbyn in, Tories out, Corbyn in, Tories out, Corbyn in.
Britain's political earthquake has cost the Prime Minister his job, and tonight it forced Labour's civil war onto the streets of London. In the worst day of his leadership, Jeremy Corbyn suffered a mass exodus from the shadow cabinet. Later on, at a bruising meeting of the Parliamentary Labour Party, MPs borrowed from the Tory rulebook as they embraced regicide. A no-confidence vote in his leadership will be held tomorrow, prompting a defiant response from Corbyn as he addressed a rally of thousands of his supporters in Parliament Square.
Don't let those people who wish us ill.
After the ugliest meeting of the Parliamentary Labour Party of his leadership, Jeremy Corbyn finally felt at home
as he bathed in a warm support from his fan base in the Momentum Group at this rally at Parliament Square. The contrasting receptions between here and there highlighted the battle lines in this power struggle for control of the Labour Party. Jeremy Corbyn says it's grassroots members who should decide his future, whilst Labour MPs say that it is they, as representatives of the wider electorate, who should have the decisive say.
You can't be the leader of the Labour Party without having sufficient support, let alone kind of good support in the Parliamentary Labour Party, and nor should you be the leader of the Labour Party if you haven't got support of the wider membership and the country at large either. Any leader of the Labour Party needs to look at themselves closely and say, do I command support in both? And if the answer is no, then your position is untenable.
Newsnight understands that a group of former Labour frontbenchers have been preparing the operation to unseat Jeremy Corbyn for months. They had expected to wait another year, but decided to move after Corbyn's lacklustre performance in the referendum campaign, a view highlighted by one of the departing frontbenchers.
In his performance, both during the months leading up to the European referendum and also during the campaign itself, he displayed a lack of understanding of the fundamental issues relating to migration and the economy that were crucial, needed to be communicated, and simply weren't. And I think we're now in a crisis situation for the country. We have to have an effective opposition, and I knew that Jeremy simply couldn't provide that.
Senior Labour figures say there is one simple reason above all else for the coup. They fear that a general election could be held within months, and that Corbyn's failure to connect with traditional Labour supporters during the referendum could lead to an electoral wipeout.
You're not talking about one part of the party that is doing something. This extends all across the party. That is serious stuff and totally unprecedented, and very difficult, I think, for a leader to function for a matter of weeks, let alone into a general election.
One veteran says there is rare unity across most of the party.
He didn't recognise the scale of the challenge, the special responsibility he has as the leader of the Labour Party, and he's lost that pledge that he gave when he first became leader, to lead a broad and inclusive party. And instead he's now in a position where he's lost the support of MPs across the political breadth of the Labour Party.
There is now such contempt for Jeremy Corbyn that his Labour enemies are even briefing that he ended up voting to leave in the referendum. This is strenuously denied by his office. One figure at the heart of the Labour referendum campaign hit back at the critics by saying that the reluctant Remainer, as Corbyn's allies dubbed him, was actually an asset.
Can't argue with the result. You know, in the end, people chose. They looked at both arguments, and we were unable to convince them that Remain to vote Remain. Now, I think that where Jeremy was in this was he was much closer to the electorate than many of us were.
It took a Ben to trigger this showdown between the Benite leadership and the rest of the parliamentary party. Jeremy Corbyn's great hero once likened the Labour Party to a bird, which needs a left wing and a right wing to fly. Relations are so bad that senior figures are now saying that the bird may split in two.
And Nick Watt is with me. And Nick, I think you have more late news about what is going on there.
Yes, I've been speaking to one of the main coup plotters, and they say they're planning to meet tomorrow morning to reach agreement on an agreed candidate that would stand if, as expected, Jeremy Corbyn loses this motion of no confidence tomorrow. And the three names, they've been canvassing support for them: Tom Watson, the Deputy Leader; Angela Eagle, the former Business Secretary; and Dan Jarvis. Now, it's not to say that they're willing and ready to stand, but these are the names that are gaining some support. And they will hopefully get them to stand. It's quite a change of tactics, because earlier in the day, the coup plotters were saying we should not stand a candidate, because if we did that, that would be an invitation to Momentum to cause trouble. But things are moving so quickly, they say they need to move too.
In your piece, you referred to this ugly meeting, parliamentary meeting tonight. I mean, what did you learn about that or after that? Yes,
it was really the worst parliamentary meeting I've ever stood outside. Interestingly, afterwards, I spoke to a current frontbencher and a former member of the Cabinet, the Labour Cabinet, and what they said to me was that Jeremy Corbyn wasn't listening to their message, and they think there's only one thing for it: the party will now have to split. I find that unlikely, but that is where you'd have the Parliamentary Labour Party doing unilateral declaration of independence, and they would be the main opposition party. Highly unlikely, but it shows how bad things are.
We'll talk to you a little more in a minute. Well, I'm joined now from Westminster by Richard Bergen. He's a prominent ally of Jeremy Corbyn, and today was appointed as the Shadow Lord Chancellor. A very good evening to you.
Good evening. How are you?
Did you ever dream when you were elected a year ago, quite a young age, that you would be like Shadow Lord Chancellor by now?
Well, I've never dreamed much in politics about getting this position or that position. I just want to do the best I can for the people and communities that Labour exists to represent, so I haven't really given it much thought, the idea of promotion or anything like that.
Right, well, you'd be fast, rapid promotion. Look, is it possible that this thing can work with Jeremy Corbyn clearly not having the support of the parliamentary party? How does this work?
Well, what I would start off by saying is I'm deeply, deeply disappointed, as Labour members and Labour voters across the country are, that when the Conservative government is in trouble up to its neck, when we've got a situation of increased economic and political uncertainty due to the decision to leave the EU, that rather than turning the fire on the Conservative government, instead some Labour MPs have chosen to manufacture an attempted leadership coup and put on the front page of the newspaper not the trouble that Conservatives are in, not the damage that the Conservatives are doing to people and communities around the breadth of the country, but have put rows within the internal Parliamentary Labour Party on the front page news. I think that's very, very disappointing. I think it's letting the Conservatives off the hook, to be frank.
What do you think Jeremy Corbyn would do if he was a backbench MP and he didn't agree with the leadership of his party? Do you think he would be restrained in what he says or how he votes or what he does?
Well, there's a difference between principled opposition on this policy or that policy to an outright attempt to capsize the whole ship. I can tell you this now for a fact. If Liz Kendall had been elected as leader of the Labour Party, if Andy Burnham had been elected as leader of the Labour Party, if Yvette Cooper had been elected as leader of the Labour Party, I wouldn't have been, and my members and people who voted for me wouldn't expect me to be engaging in an attempt to capsize the whole ship. I just think it's wrong. I think it's a distraction. I think it's letting the Conservatives off the hook, to be frank.
Do you think the party can survive? We just heard Nick Watt explaining to us that he's been speaking to people who say this party will split. Do you think it can survive in this current form with basically internal war going on?
Well, what the Labour Party or the Labour MPs and my colleagues need to understand is there is no future for Labour as a vehicle to connect with ordinary working people and change the lives of working people length and breadth of the country if we return to the politics of what is considered by so many to be the establishment. There's no future for Labour if we return to the political and economic status quo, which saw Labour lose the trust of people in Britain despite all the good work we did in Parliament. This really is about what is the Labour Party about. I think a lesson of the European Union referendum was that people out there are angry at the political and economic establishment. If people think the way forward for Labour is to return to being perceived as a party of the political and economic establishment, and I think they're sadly mistaken, and it would be politically and electorally disastrous.
Aren't you basically just saying to people who have fundamental and profound disagreements with the direction of the party, you're basically saying it's disloyal, you just have to agree with us and go along with us and you can't question it? And Jeremy Corbyn would never have done that. He never did do that. He defied the whip about 428 times. These people have their consciences just as you have your conscience, and there's no reason why they should have to support someone who they just don't support.
The truth is that Jeremy Corbyn was elected with an overwhelming majority, the biggest mandate that any political leader in British history has been elected upon. He's only been in position for 9 months. We've had 4 victories in the parliamentary by-elections. We've had where in 3 of which we increased the Labour share of the votes. We won 4 mayoral elections. And the truth is, on the European Union referendum, Jeremy Corbyn's position of saying that the European Union isn't perfect, it's not ideal, but on balance we should stay in and change it in favour of ordinary people and make it more democratic, that resonated more with the electorate than the views of some of those criticising him, who thought the way forward in working class communities in the north and elsewhere was to kid people on that the European Union is perfect. Nobody believed it.
I mean, look, you basically have to admit, Jeremy Corbyn is a radical, more than the British mainstream. To make it work from that radical position in a general election, and we may be having one soon, you would have to be supremely confident and supremely united around the position that you're taking. And that's just not the impression your party is giving now. Do you really think you could win a general election before the end of this year with the shadow cabinet having deserted the leader and with Jeremy Corbyn still in place?
Well, a new shadow cabinet is in place, and when you talk about Jeremy Corbyn being radical, I don't think there's anything radical about proposing a £10 an hour minimum wage. I don't think there's anything radical about proposing a massive building programme of council houses. I don't think there's anything radical, by the way, in thinking that Britain made a huge mistake in getting involved in the Iraq war. We can win the next general election, but if we don't win the next general election, then I think that some people do need to ask themselves this question: did it help Labour or did it harm Labour? Did it help Labour or harm the people that Labour seeks to represent? Manufacturing a leadership row, letting the Tories off the hook, and basically making the news story divisions in the Parliamentary Labour Party, not the mess that this Conservative government is making of this country.
Just a simple one, really. If he does lose a motion of no confidence in the Parliamentary Party, does he step down and try and go to another contest? What actually happens at that point?
Well, first of all, I'd say we shouldn't have a leadership contest. People shouldn't be seeking a leadership contest. There's more important things to do. We should be focusing our fire on the Conservatives. But if Labour MPs go through with it and vote no confidence in Jeremy Corbyn tomorrow, then I think they've got to understand that in order to remove Jeremy Corbyn, the duly elected Labour leader just 9 months ago with a huge mandate, they're going to have to take part in a democratic process. And all the candidates who stood for Labour, the Labour leader at the last leadership election, said quite rightly that they wanted to empower members. We shouldn't be seeking to silence members or disrespect the democratic choice that they made.
But you're implying that he can limp on.
I'm not implying anything about limping. If Jeremy Corbyn has to stand in a leadership election and he is prepared to do so, then there's a very good chance of Jeremy Corbyn being re-elected as leader of the Labour Party. And if he is, what MPs should do then is what they should be doing now, which is ending the infighting, ending the inward-looking behaviour and focusing on the real enemy, the Conservative government that's doing so much harm to people and public services in this country.
Richard Bergen, thanks ever so much, and sorry about that annoying earpiece. I know what they're like.
No problem. Thank you.
Now, what about the Tories? The plan had been for the party to take up to 14 weeks for a new leader to be selected, rather more than the 5 days it took when Margaret Thatcher was deposed. But the 1922 committee, which governs the leadership election, decided to expedite that today by a month or so. So a new leader will be in place by the 2nd of September. And to meet that deadline, the candidates have to declare themselves by this Thursday. So the race is on. Emily's been looking at the likely runners.
I will do everything I can as Prime Minister to steady the ship over the coming weeks and months. But I do not think it would be right for me to try to be the captain that steers our country to its next destination.
The nautical metaphors that emerged from a Prime Minister close to tears sounded appropriately seafaringly British that extraordinary morning. And sure enough, the search for that captain began in earnest this week. The party of government, riven by its war over Europe, now has to try harder than ever to put division behind it. The question for many is twofold: who can unify and who can win, each useless without the other.
Gold medal!
It's no secret that Boris Johnson wants the job, but can the zip-wire drifter, laughed at by the French, pull it off?
He can certainly be serious. I think he increased his stature during the campaign. He did very well before the Treasury Select Committee, answering some very difficult questions over an extended period. And he showed that he'd gone up a level, I think, in people's estimation in the debates. Can he be a unifier? Well, in that it takes two to tango, and we'll have to see what the losing side wants.
He's currently the runaway favourite, an irony not lost on his colleagues.
I'm a veteran of 3 leadership campaigns, and I can tell you this, that the favourite never wins.
So you don't think it's going to be him?
I think that he is an admirable candidate, but he will be one of many. But if you're telling me he's the favourite, I'm telling you that the favourite never wins.
Boris Johnson's the candidate the party goes to for its adrenaline fix, described to me by one MP as a 4-year ride on a Big Dipper. I understand he has the backing of Rupert Murdoch, and that may count for a lot. But he's also been described by some in his own party as, I quote, a little bit grubby. His self-interest never too far from the surface. Don't be surprised if you see a Stop Boris campaign gathering a bit of momentum too. Heidi Allen is one of those backing anyone but.
For me, it is clear that it was a leadership bid for Boris. You know, even as recent as February, I think he was saying that a Brexit vote would cause uncertainty for business and government shouldn't be distracted with these things. So it seemed very obvious to me that this was about his desire to be leader rather than putting the country first. And when a man is leading a campaign that stands in front of a great red bus that says £350 million extra for the NHS and then says, well, actually, maybe not, that does not set us on the right path to changing that relationship that we have with voters.
So you don't think people can trust Boris?
I would ask them to consider whether he has the qualities that they want in a leader. And, you know, looking for that transparency and having people trust us again. My inbox is in meltdown, predominantly people who wanted to remain, but also some people who did vote to leave and feel duped and felt that they were sold a pup. And I know in politics, you know, we're salespeople, you're buying, do you trust our manifesto? Do you trust the things that we're saying to you? And I think on this occasion it's just gone too far, and he stood in front of that campaign, and for that reason I think people will have lost faith in him.
She's not the only one with her doubts about Boris Johnson. This speech was uploaded onto the internet's biggest porn site, labelling him Britain's dumbest blonde. Theresa May is expected to put her name in the ring in the next 24 hours. Former Tory Treasurer Catherine Mayer says don't underestimate the Home Secretary.
I think she's a very formidable woman, and I think because maybe she's quite shy, a lot of people don't see her as, you know, she's not out there smiling because she's shy and because she's very focused. And I think we need somebody as serious as Theresa May, who knows her stuff and knows Brussels.
Sajid Javid and Stephen Crabb are tonight thought to be considering a joint bid as leader and deputy. Andrea Leadsom may put her name in too. And this morning, after a weekend holed up at Dorneywood trying to assess his future, we heard from the Chancellor, George Osborne.
It will not be plain sailing in the days ahead.
Statesmanlike but sombre, the man who once saw his chance of leading the country riding high now accepts he's more likely to have to follow in behind a former rival. The Brexit budget may have disappeared from his rhetoric, but he was very determined not to row back from, he would say resile from, a single one of those doom-laden prophecies. He's weighing up right now whether he could work for Boris Johnson, perhaps, as his Foreign Secretary, or even for Theresa May, but there's little love lost there. Whatever the choices, they need to be fast. Any names not submitted to the ballot by Thursday won't be in the ring for the leadership. And that, perhaps, is key. One Remainer tells me this can't look like an ego-based beauty contest. The country's looking to the government at a time of national crisis. The demand for grown-ups, whatever that means, is high.
Emily in Westminster. Well, our political editor Nick Watt is still with me. Nick, any late developments on the Tory leadership front?
Yes, well, I had a long conversation with one of George Osborne's oldest friends today, and he told me that he is not going to stand in this Tory leadership contest. Underline not. And if you pick up a copy of the Times tomorrow, you will see an article by George Osborne saying precisely that. But this friend said to me, at the moment, George Osborne is not planning to endorse anyone, but he does still want to have a role in the next government, and he is leaning towards Boris Johnson, and I think we hear mention of the Foreign Office, possibly. He could go down that route. And it's interesting, when Boris Johnson launches his campaign later this week, you're going to hear him say, I am the unity candidate. I can bring together Remain and I can bring together Leave. And that is why he's reaching out like mad to the Remain camp, and he would love to get George Osborne on board. But there will be a very big Stop Boris campaign, and the person who's probably going to be the biggest beneficiary from that is Theresa May.
Nick, thank you. And the Times is suggesting that Theresa May's had a surge in support in the last few days. Well, when the dust settles on the politics, the big issue will be, what is our relationship with the EU and how is it going to be decided upon? Essentially, there are three broad outcomes: that we leave properly, exiting the EU and the single market, and we no longer have free movement; that we half leave by going into the European Economic Area, the Norwegian model, that's outside the EU, in the single market and with free movement; and then, which must be least likely, is that we somehow remain in the EU. Three possible destinations. There are also three roads to those destinations. Parliament and government could make the decision. MPs would probably choose Norway at this point if they could. Then there's the possibility of a general election to decide, with parties pitching their view to the voters. The Lib Dems, for example, have said they'll campaign to overturn the referendum. Then there's the second referendum option, that we talk to the Europeans and have a vote at the end of it. Could we overturn last Thursday? Lots of destinations, lots of ways of getting there. Well, Chris Cook's been thinking about the details, the practical and legal questions over the journey on which we are soon to embark.
Brexit will be one of the most complex, all-consuming tasks facing any British government since the war. And right now, there are 1,000 different combinations and permutations about how it might play out. So it's worth focusing on just a few of the biggest moving parts in the puzzle.
The first of these moving parts is something called Article 50. That's Article 50 of the treaty that underpins the European Union. And what that provides for is a process by which a member state can leave the EU. But it's important to know a few details of it. First of all, once we formally invoke Article 50, there'll be a 2-year period for us to negotiate our exit, and then we're out. But we haven't invoked it yet. In fact, we're not going to invoke it until we have a new Prime Minister over there in Downing Street. But there's an argument about whether the new Prime Minister on their own will actually be allowed to invoke Article 50 or whether it will have to be put through Parliament. So could a Prime Minister invoke Article 50 without a parliamentary vote?
Well, for the Prime Minister to do that would involve the executive in effect overruling an Act of Parliament, because the European Communities Act is what keeps us in the European Union. And by invoking Article 50, in effect, the Prime Minister is saying, actually, no longer will this Act have force. And that's quite a crunchy proposition for the executive to overrule the legislature. So I think there are profound constitutional and public law issues around that action.
A court may be asked to give a view on this. The current Prime Minister today didn't.
The issue for triggering Article 50, the decision will be for the next Prime Minister and the next Cabinet, and the arrangements they put in place must be for them to decide.
Given that the Commons and Lords are both pro-Remain, passing a vote may prove a bit of a hurdle in itself, especially if MPs think the plans for Brexit are not what voters expect.
The second issue here is legitimacy, or how do you get a democratic mandate for the deal we eventually negotiate? Consider this. A lot of people voted leave because they want to control immigration. But if we get a deal like Norway's, we'll get good access to the EU single market at the cost of not really controlling EU immigration. So how do you get a new mandate to negotiate that? Well, some people are discussing a second referendum, perhaps at the end of the process. Others, a snap general election in the next few months.
If there were an election, the new Prime Minister could include principles of negotiation in their platform. Other parties might stand on staying in, but still, there's room for voters to feel very betrayed.
There's a problem with securing a democratic mandate for the withdrawal deal, because basically you're choosing between seeking a democratic mandate before you start negotiating, before you invoke Article 50, at which point we can't possibly know what the deal is going to be, or at the end of the process when time is running out and you may be choosing between what is a not very attractive deal to leave or no deal at all.
Some people have put forward scenarios where the Article 50 declaration is either delayed or never comes. But it's important to remember a third moving part, the economy. The Treasury will get quite worried if there are long delays, because delays mean uncertainty. Uncertainty about our future trading relationship with the EU. Uncertainty about our immigration policy. And all of that will depress business activity and investment in the UK from abroad in particular.
There are other moving parts, like devolution. The other legislatures cannot block Brexit, but problems in the peace process will need addressing. So will an appetite for Scottish independence. But Article 50, the mandate, and the economy will determine a lot.
Chris Cook there. Well, earlier I spoke to another Chris Grayling, a leading Brexiteer in the Cabinet, and I began by asking him whether all the different models of being outside the EU are still on the table.
Well, I think we've got to have a number of priorities as we go into the negotiation. Clearly we want the best possible deal for the United Kingdom in terms of trade, and that, I think, is common sense because we are the biggest customer of the European Union. We're 16% of their exports. It's in their interest that they keep access to our market. Clearly, we've also got a mandate from the people last week to have the ability to set limits on the number of people who come and live and work in the United Kingdom. But I think above all, this was a close result. And so what we've got to be certain is as we go into the negotiation, we're mindful of the fact that people expect us to stay an outward-facing internationalist country, and that we want to be good friends and neighbours of the European Union, even though we're not going to be part of what they're doing.
Okay, I'll tell you why I ask. I mean, it's just that Boris Johnson, his piece in The Telegraph, he talked about British people will still be able to go and work in the EU, to live, to travel, to study, to buy homes and to settle down. Now that sounded like he was potentially embracing a model that might allow free movement, isn't it? Isn't that what he's saying there?
Well, I think the key point is about the ability to control. We're not in the business of saying to people, you know, you can't move around the world, you can't come to the United Kingdom to work, you can't come here if you've got a job. But for example, one of the things I think we shouldn't have is 77,000 people a year from within the European Union turning up in the United Kingdom just to look for a job. Even the Prime Minister in the past has said that shouldn't happen. That's one of the things we should be looking at as we go through this process. But I think it's really important, given the fact this was a close result, and given the fact that we want to, all of us on the Leave campaign don't want to become Little Britain. We want to be an outward-facing nation. We want to be doing new deals around the world. We don't want to be part of a European integrationist project, but we want to be friends and good neighbours.
MPs will want to respect the referendum, and so they won't say we stay in. But if MPs believe the Norway option means you're out of the EU, you're in the single market, but you do have free movement of European citizens. Is that illegitimate? Are MPs not allowed to vote for that, or ask the government to vote for that, or is that somehow out of bounds?
Well, Parliament is ultimately sovereign, but the clear message from all sides of the Commons this afternoon, as we discussed the issues that arise from last Thursday's referendum vote, was that we have clear instructions from the British people. They've given us a message that says we want to be outside the European Union, we don't want to be a closed-door nation, we don't want to be Little Britain, but we do want the ability to set controls on the number of people who come into and out of the country.
No, I understand that point. I'm just trying to work out, because frankly we're 4 days after and we haven't got a clue, trying to work out whether membership of the single market is still on the table or whether that is now being ruled out.
Well, I think, as I say, membership of the single market is a phrase. What is our objective in all this? What has the plan always been? What will the government's plan be now? It's to do what is in the best interest of the United Kingdom, and that is ensuring that our businesses can carry on selling goods and services in the European Union and vice versa. And whatever you care to call it, that's the important thing. And it's in their interest. We've heard from the German CBI recently. They want us to carry on trading normally, and it's all of our interest that that should happen.
On the programme the other day, Dan Hannan did draw a distinction between free movement of people and free movement of labour. Is free movement of labour for people who have a job, is that something you would countenance?
What came out of last Thursday were some clear messages for government around the kind of approach that people wanted us to take. They want us to leave the European Union, they want to have controls over immigration, they want to negotiate new trade deals around the world. These are the messages we got from that referendum, and now the government has to sit down in a careful, methodical way, and that's what we discussed at Cabinet this morning, plan how we'll do that and how we get the best arrangements with our partners for the future.
Boris Johnson is saying we'll still be able to work, travel and live in the rest of the EU, even though he doesn't say that they'll be allowed to do that here. Would it not have been better if we'd actually had, if you like, nailed down a kind of clear vision of what the outlook like?
Well, you take the travel issue, of course, I fully expect people to be able to travel normally within Europe, just as the way they do now, to have holidays just as the way they do
Boris Johnson said to
around the world.
Boris Johnson said to live, to work, to travel, to study, to buy homes and to settle down in the rest of the EU.
But these are things you can do around the world, not just in Europe, not just in the European Union. It is custom and practice. It's normal for people to be able to move around sensibly if they can sort themselves out in terms of money, if they want to go where they want in terms of holiday. That happens all over the world.
And just a final one, are you going to be supporting Boris Johnson as leader, or is there anyone else you have in mind who may be, if you like, a healer? Yourself, maybe, even.
I'm definitely not going to be putting my hat into the ring. I'm not yet making clear what I'm going to do in the leadership campaign. That'll come in the next few days.
Chris Grayling, thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Now, if you are and you're living in the city, it was another exhilarating day. Not in a good way, particularly. Our business editor, Helen Thomas, is with me. Helen, just give us a little summary of what was going on.
Well, it was another really ugly day in the markets. The pound dropped again down to its lowest level since 1985. In the stock markets, the FTSE 100, big international companies, is faring up quite well. But it's really the FTSE 250 where the damage is being done, a more domestic-focused index, more reflective of the UK economy. It's now down 15% since the referendum. And then late in the day, we had another blow, which is that Standard & Poor's, the credit rating agency, downgraded the UK, stripped us of our AAA rating. And that AAA badge is the gold standard. We've had it since 1978 from S&P. We clung on to it all the way through the financial crisis, and now it's gone.
How significant, though, actually is that?
Well, you can think of a credit rating as an indication of the likelihood of default, which means that a lower rating sometimes means higher borrowing costs. Now, in this case, no one thinks the UK government's going to default on its debts, and borrowing costs have actually fallen in recent days. But you can also think about the credit rating as an indication of how attractive a place is to invest. And in that context, the S&P report is pretty damning. So it talks about reassessing the institutional framework of the UK. And that's a polite way of saying that our politics is falling apart at the seams. It's pretty gloomy on the outlook for confidence and the outlook for growth. And S&P is pretty clear. They think our membership of the European Union helped the standing of the pound, helped enhance London's position as a financial centre and helped attract investment. The risk is, in their view, that it all starts to unravel.
Helen, thank you very much. Well, if we in Britain are in any way confused about exactly what we want in the Article 50 world, it's not impossible the rest of the EU is confused as well. There are 27 other members who have to agree on a line after all. Our diplomatic editor, Mark Urban, has been on the continent since the referendum, trying to find out where the debate there will settle. It's Monday, so it must be Berlin, where the big beasts of the EU met today. Mark.
Evan, since I've started this, one thing has become very clear. There are a lot of people, institutions, countries that have a lot of grudges against Britain due to all sorts of past battles, the Cameron package that was negotiated earlier this year, all sorts of different reasons. And they are delighted that Britain is leaving and are effectively saying, can we help you with your bags? That includes Jean-Claude Juncker, the head of the European Parliament, and we've had statements from the leaders of France, Italy and Belgium, which I think you could also put in that category. What's been less evident, which is what I was expecting to see, was the emergence of a more, if you like, understanding camp. Some helpful remarks from the leader of Poland today, but apart from that, we haven't really seen that emerge. But of course, not all EU members are created equal. There is one almighty, powerful one at the centre of this alliance, now defining the policy of the 27, Germany, and it's quite clear from interventions they've already made that they're going to be key players in this. The annual German-French People's Festival has been going for more than 50 years. It started when Europe's old adversaries were becoming friends, and the Franco-German engine or partnership powered the EU. But these days the French troops are long gone from Berlin, and that alliance doesn't seem quite so equal either. Germany is in charge now. And Germans also are taking potshots at the EU. Arno Lorger runs this stall, and he's quite a Eurosceptic. He wants the Deutschmark back and urges his leader not to be too tough on Britain.
Nicht hart. Sie soll sich den Großbritannien annähern. Sie soll so schnell wie möglich sich Großbritannien nähern und dass es irgendwie weitergeht. Dass wir, wenn jetzt noch, sagen wir, 3 Länder aussteigen aus der EU, wird die EU sowieso baden.
But in the rest of Germany, there are other ideas about how best to respond to Brexit. Even the ruling party has divisions. Many of those around Chancellor Merkel reject leniency, arguing if Britain's leaving, it needs to say what it wants and get a move on.
Looking from outside to Britain, you see a Prime Minister who wants not to hand over the document. You see potential candidates for a succession of him. They also say they don't want to hesitate concerning that thing. The Parliament is saying nothing on that. Therefore, we are a little bit irritated.
At this architect's office in Berlin, they'd like a plan too. It's a German outpost of a British firm, and already they're worried about potential clients having their confidence undermined and the effect on their mixed German and British workforce.
They won't make it easy for Britain to negotiate deals. I think the companies will somehow take a hit, like we will take the hit, and carry on. It's just a shame, basically, to make it all so difficult. And I'm not talking about the business relationships here, I'm talking about personal relationships as well. Especially if like every company who has branches abroad, there's a lot of personal lives involved, and this will all be damaged by that.
As for Germany's continued exports to Britain, the prediction of economic experts here is of a slight drop, but for trade to remain substantial. The real crux of coming negotiations will be political, and nobody expects Merkel to be generous in those.
The UK is in a very weakened bargaining position. The only thing it can do now is we're going to postpone the process and thereby impose so much pain ourselves that you will also feel some of that pain. And that's a very destructive process. And ultimately, UK will have to pay a price for keeping some relationship to the UK, to the Euro area and to the European Union. So I doubt it will get a very favourable deal.
When it came to how and when those negotiations might start, it was to Berlin that the French and Italian leaders came today. President Hollande gave the distinct impression that Britain couldn't be shown the door soon enough.
Nothing is worse than uncertainty. Uncertainty gets in the way of political decisions. It also gets in the way of financial decisions.
Matteo Renzi said anything less than a speedy Brexit would be an insult to democracy. But Merkel was very clear. Britain shouldn't be bounced out and will choose its own Article 50 moment.
We agree that Article 50 of the European treaties is a very clear statement. The member state wanting to leave the European Union has to apply to the European Council, and before this application, no further steps can be taken.
So they departed, having set the stage for tomorrow's Brussels summit.
The Merkel view, for the time being, is holding that Britain should be allowed time to change its mind before it invokes Article 50. But once that happens, the real challenge for the Germans will be whether the other allies agree to the sort of terms they would want to give Britain on the outside.
The single market is a harmonized market with the four liberties. You can move your money as you want, you can send goods where you want, you can do services where you want, and you have the free movement of employees and citizens. Taking some things out of that single market only to keep Britain in the single market, I think this is not a realistic option.
At the German-French festival on Berlin's outskirts, entertainer Martin Martini belts out the hits from yesteryear. The old refrains about the benefits of EU membership are wearing a little thin in this country too. But the latest polling suggests few Germans want to waltz towards a referendum of their own. Instead, Chancellor Merkel has public support to get the UK's divorce over with as quickly and cleanly as possible, as Germany increasingly sets the tone for the rest of Europe.
Mark Urban there. Back on Thursday night, results night, the first declaration came from Gibraltar, and it was the Remain side's best moment by far, 96% support. Gibraltarians worry that Brexit might upset the delicate relationship they have with Spain, which lost the territory in 1704 and would rather like to have it back. Well, Gabriel Gatehouse has been talking to the Chief Minister of Gibraltar, including on the subject of his idea that parts of the UK might stay in the EU while other parts leave.
If there's one part of the UK that definitely doesn't want to leave the European Union, it is this. Less than 10 miles from the coast of North Africa, Gibraltar
voted overwhelmingly for Remain. There are 30,000 people living on the rock. Only 823 of them said they wanted to leave the EU. Gibraltar is more pro-European than anywhere in Britain. Newsnight has learnt that Gibraltar's government is working on a plan to stay in the Union, and it's looking for allies. In his first broadcast interview since the referendum, the territory's chief minister told us he was talking to Scotland's Nicola Sturgeon about various options.
Well, there are potential different formulas out there. This is like a kaleidoscope that has not yet settled, but one of them may be the formula that Denmark used in the 1970s before the Lisbon Treaty and before Article 50 was even invented, to simply strip out a part of a territory that doesn't want to stay part of the European Union. The member state is still defined as Denmark, but it no longer includes Greenland. Well, I can imagine a situation where some parts of what is today the member state United Kingdom are stripped out and others remain. That means that we don't have to apply again for access. We simply remain with the access that we have today, and those parts that leave are then given a different sort of access which is negotiated, but not necessarily under Article 50.
The governments of Gibraltar and Scotland may share a desire to stay in the EU, but on the subject of the UK they differ. The SNP wants independence. Gibraltarians, almost without exception, want to remain part of Britain. Immediately after the referendum, Spain raised the issue of shared sovereignty. The Spanish flag on the rock is closer than it was before, the foreign minister said. Now that is absolute anathema to almost everyone here. London has reiterated its commitment to Gibraltar, but the foreign secretary said that the territory's interests will be harder to protect outside the EU.
So anybody who thinks that this is a time to propose joint sovereignty or that they're going to get any millimetre of advantage in respect of the sovereignty of Gibraltar is completely wrong. They shouldn't waste their breath.
10,000 Spanish workers cross into Gibraltar every day. They and the Gibraltarians have been reassured that nothing will change for now. But the reality is that at the moment no one really knows how Brexit will play itself out here.
Gabriel Gatehouse there. Well, on this whole issue of how we leave, I spoke to Kristalina Georgieva, the Vice President of the European Commission. I asked her whether she regretted the UK wasn't offered an emergency break on free movement because that may have prevented a Brexit.
In the discussions that have taken place, every effort has been made by the Commission to offer a deal that is fair for the United Kingdom and for the rest of the European Union. And at that process, we thought we got to a point when the Prime Minister of the UK had something good to offer to its people. But my impression is that during the debates around Brexit, this deal disappeared. Nobody talked about it. The issues that have been discussed actually had nothing to do with the parameters of the deal.
The 27 members, the Commission, you guys, do you think you will now look into your souls and say, we need to listen more, we need to be more responsive, we need to be more flexible, and we need to take account of the scepticism that is running not just in the UK, but across other countries too?
We are facing an existential challenge as a union. We ought to make it possible for those of us that want to and have to integrate further to do it, and for those who want to be loose in the union to also do it. This is not at all easy, but with or without Brexit, this is a question for us to address. And of course, we need to continue to look into the mirror and ask ourselves, what is it that we can do better for Europe and for the European people? No question about it.
How long do you think these negotiations, the divorce negotiation, how long is this going to take? Can we do that in 2 years? That's what Article 50 allows.
In the end of these 2 years, one of two things would happen. Either negotiations are completed and then there is a new relation between the UK and the EU defined, or there may be a need for prolongation, but for that there has to be unanimity among the heads of government of the European Union, the 27, and of course the UK. We only can, at this point of time, wait for the clock to start ticking, and then roll our sleeves and work together for the best possible outcome we can get under the circumstances.
And no punishment, no trying to hurt the UK in order to teach the others a lesson.
We are witnessing such a turmoil at the moment that the least we can do is just to keep calm and try to resolve a very difficult problem for the benefit of all our people. The wish of all of us is that we bring a resolution that is as positive as it can be under very difficult circumstances.
The Polish foreign minister, whose name I'm not going to try to pronounce, has blamed the Commission for a lot going wrong and said, you know, this is a crisis for the Commission of the EU. He wants to downgrade the Commission, and he's, I think, suggested that Jean-Claude Juncker should resign as a result of everything that has happened. Do you have some sympathy with what he has, with his analysis?
You know, my sympathy is with all of us. We are facing a very difficult period of time. The financial markets are telling us that they're very nervous around the decisions that are being taken. And I think last we need is more turmoil and more finger pointing. I think it would be healthiest if we are to concentrate on the universe of problems we have to solve and work together to solve them.
Kristalina Georgieva, thank you so much for talking to me.
Thank you.
Well, let's finish by reflecting on where we are this evening at 11:20. I'm joined by Zoe Williams of The Guardian and Tom Newton-Dunn, political editor of The Sun. Zoe, can Jeremy Corbyn survive?
You say that like we rehearsed it. Look, it depends what you mean by survive. I don't think he's going to go quietly. I don't think he's going to submit to the vote of no confidence. I don't think he's going to allow a new leadership election without his name on the ticket. I don't think he's going to do any of these things. But do I think he's going to end up victorious in the long run? No, I don't.
Is this a fight to the death of the Labour Party then, Tom? Is that what the plan is? That they're each going to just go on wrestling into the mud?
It's a rock and a very hard place coming together, and it's incredibly hard to see how on earth anyone can win all this. There has to be some sort of final death of one or the other.
But there are candidates. There are candidates who could be unity candidates. Would Angela Eagle, would she be a unity candidate?
No. I've got to lay this to rest because that is a classic bubble suggestion. You know, this person who never upsets anybody, she's a good candidate. You cannot have. You know, what the people who voted for Jeremy Corbyn want is a Pablo Iglesias or a Tsipras. They want a big, charismatic, left-wing, big ideas, new model person. And I completely understand and support that. I don't think Jeremy Corbyn has been it, but I do not think what we're looking at is the rock and a hard place. I don't think we're looking at Blairites versus the far left anymore. I think we're looking at a huge number of people who Corbyn's camp would say don't even have skin in the game because they're not Blairites, but they're, you know, honest.
They're not Labourites either.
They're not.
They're from all over the place.
Yeah, they're from all over the place.
But sorry, Zoe, who is your candidate? I mean, who do you want? You've got to have a plan B before you reject plan A.
You know I hate committing, but I would be delighted to see Lisa Nandy standing. Yeah, I would be delighted to see Keir Starmer standing.
Do you think they've got good candidates, Tom? A sort of range of alternatives in the wings?
They do, but they're on the moderate side. You know, the Dan Jarvises, the Chukwumunas, highly impressive politicians have absolutely zero appeal to the current new base.
You see, again, I disagree. I don't think you're talking about moderates. You know, the
Who
whole
would you call that lot then?
The whole conception of what moderation is has changed so much in the past 5 years that people who previously would have been seen as on the right of the party or on the nothing of the party. I mean, Dan Jarvis is on the nothing of the party.
On the subject of moderates, there has been chatter about, hey, why don't the right of the Labour Party and the left of the Conservative Party, they're all Remainers, they're all happy, they've been working together. Why don't they somehow get together and create a new force in the centre?
It's a wonderful idea, isn't it? And we have this debate once every 2 years, roughly, in British politics. We had it during the coalition years. Remember, they have the nice purple party, you know, the blues and the yellows will come together and it will be...
Grand coalition.
It never happens, and here's the reason why.
Why doesn't it happen? Why does it not happen?
Here's the reason why. Well, two reasons. One, the SDP, everybody remembers what happened to them. Two...
I actually don't anymore.
Older people like us remember what happened to the SDP. Two, there is no base. So activists are generally on one side of the Tory activists are generally quite right-wing, Labour activists a bit more left-wing. No one's in the middle, really, who signs up to political parties to go out, deliver your leaflets,
You don't need to deliver leaflets now. You've got
it's a desperately
Facebook
20th century.
But here's the
Unfortunately,
thing.
you still do need a bit of that.
Here's the thing. I don't really think we're talking about the left of the Tories and the right of the Labour here. When you talk about people who wanted to remain, it's not really a left-right issue. It's a huge question, and many of us are devastated by the result, and are devastated not from a left-wing point of view, but from a sheer vandalism point of view. And I think you could create an alliance of people who felt that this was an incredibly vandalistic act and who could put aside their political differences, however great they were.
For an election and say, look, to overturn the referendum, elect us and we stay in the EU.
Yeah, exactly.
But what then? You then get over the EU thing. Eventually, at some time in our history, we're going to get over the EU thing.
Yeah.
And then you've still got left-right austerity versus
I know,
spending.
but Tom, you're speaking as though this would be a disaster because it would be chaotic. Look what we're in now. We don't have a prime minister and we don't have a leader of the opposition.
Do you think Labour could campaign and say, let's stay in? I mean, is that a plausible thing? Overturn the referendum?
I think it's dangerous. I think it's extremely dangerous because, I mean, clearly it's plausible. Clearly you're getting extremely well with Zoe and others. They do risk, however, doing a Scotland and alienating that entire northern sweep,
you lose them all.
Which would do away with 100
Let's
MPs.
just finish. We've got 40 seconds on the Conservative Party. I mean, can they heal this more easily than Labour's problems?
I mean, the obvious route for them to heal it, I cannot see how they would make it work if they elect Theresa May because Boris is such a divisive and toxic figure. I don't see how they make it work because they have this kind of spurt of energy.
They will eventually.